Welcome to Briefing's first Tiger Team. The Tiger Team idea comes from the pivotal role such a team played in saving the lives of the Apollo 13 astronauts, a team of technical specialists brought together to thrash out very difficult problems. Briefing's version: bring together legal business management leaders from across role types and departments to focus on your biggest challenges. With our partners at Pinnacle, we've been researching with leaders in finance, marketing and BD and risk about what the biggest law firm challenges really are, now and in the near future. We took these challenges and turned them into discussion points for our Tigers. I'm Rupert Collins-White, and I'm the Briefing Tiger on this team. My Pinnacle guest is Pinnacle's CEO, Mike Bailey. I hope you enjoy the discussion. We cover a range of topics, focusing where we can on how finance and other data plays a key part in facing a challenging future. But we also uncover pointers for better process implementation, the vital role of communication during the pandemic, the fascinating role that unified purpose plays in rapid change, and more besides. I hope you enjoy our first team.
So we brought together a panel of Tigers, and so we have in alphabetical order Kate Bassett, who's Global Head of Legal Project Management and Process Improvement at Ashurst. I hope I'm getting these titles right. Mike Giles, Finance Director at Fieldfisher. Darren Mitchell, who's COO for Hogan Lovells. And Allison Scanlan, who's Director of BI, Finance and PMS for Herbert Smith Freehills. Plus we have our partner guest, Mike Bailey, who's CEO of Pinnacle, with us on this for this session. Just to start us off, one of the things that we identified, we can't start this conversation without talking about how ultimately law firms have been deeply affected by the pandemic. And if you had one takeaway at the moment in terms of wow, I wish we'd known that, or this has been a great success from delivering this, what one thing would it be? And I'm going to start with you, Kate. I think that would be right to do.
Yeah, so I think it's all been surprisingly smooth. So when we first went into the lockdown, we've got relatively new IT equipment, but the whole global firm adapted, embraced the change. And I was amazed, as I am a change professional. What we do in new law is we've for the last 5 years been trying to get people to change their behaviours and embrace new technology, new ways of working. And the whole firm did it within a matter of a few days. So I was pleasantly surprised, and it really made me think about change management and the burning platform. So when you do have that burning platform, people do it and they don't question it, which we've always come up against, this questioning behaviour within a law firm of, why do I need to change? It's worked well in the past. What is the burning platform? So for me and my new law world, if we can't make this work now, we're never going to make it work. So it's my time and my team's time.
Mm. How's Darren? You're next in my next along in my screen. What's your kind of if you summed up, how has it been? I don't mean in a day-to-day kind of manner, like in a sound, but I mean, can you sort of give us a brief notion of how has it been? What's the kind of takeaway so far? Obviously, we're still in early days of it in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for us. I mean, obviously, we're quite big, so we've been doing this on a global basis. And I guess one of the interesting observations is if you look at our kind of classic DR plans in these kind of areas, it's not really envisaged a model in which, on a global basis, we've had to do what we've had to do with moving everybody remote. And so actually tilting our plans and our thinking had to happen quite quickly. And I pulled together a group for across the firm as our kind of coronavirus SWAT team to really focus on this. Throughout it, we put in place a plan of stages in advance. So before we had to tip out of most of our offices other than Asia, that was obviously very early on, we were looking at how we would do this, making sure we got everyone ready with Citrix access, getting everything up to speed to be able to do kind of remote tests, so that when we actually got to the point of having to tip people out, we had a plan in place. We had a kind of a 3-stage plan, which we were then rolling out, increasing our technical capabilities behind the scenes. And I have to say, I'm biased because I kind of led the effort, but it's gone remarkably smoothly. And the feedback from people is one of pleasant surprise at how well everything has worked. there are challenges. Not everyone has laptops, for example. So what are you going to do with people who haven't got laptops? Not everyone's even got home internet connection, which was a surprise to me. So having to deal with those kind of issues has been just things we've had to work through. But it's all worked really quite well. And actually, for a lot of people, there have been elements of this which have been quite a positive experience. So that's certainly one of the things we're looking to learn from.
Alison, how has it been? How was the takeaway for you so far from the data side, really, of things?
Yeah, so from the data side, I guess the data that we're working with and we're thinking about presenting to the leadership to help support that decision making. It's not new; it exists there, and probably a lot of it was already being reported on. We've just changed the way that we're reporting on some of it to change the frequency, perhaps change the way we're viewing it, just to help drive those insights. And that's probably accelerated some of the things that I was hoping that we would get to as part of the plan coming up for this year. So that's been a good outcome from my perspective, and I think well received. And if that's got my main aim is making sure we're supporting the insights that the exec needs. So if we're doing anything to help in that space, that's been really good. And we've not been limited by the remote working. Echoing what Kate and Darren said, from an outside perspective, it's gone incredibly well, but knowing that there's been an awful lot of hard work going on in the background to do it, and a lot of forward planning, but a lot of quick thinking on feet as well, as we probably went out in some areas slightly more quickly than the forward planning I thought we might do. So it's worked incredibly well. We're pretty used to working remotely and not having everyone in the same place at the same time. So from my area, those practices were there. We're just building on them.
Hopefully we'll get into which things got accelerated. I hope in a second, because I think that's something we've got for everyone. If I can get it. And Mike, Mike Giles, what's your takeaway? What is your key takeaway? How's it been so far?
Like everybody else, I think it's gone incredibly smoothly. There's been huge goodwill amongst the partners and staff here to try and make things work. We had been trialing a sort of hot desking, remote working arrangement within the finance and HR teams. Anyway, that's been going for some months, and therefore we were able to go to remote working quite easily. And I think the rest of the firm has just sort of knuckled down and recognized that they need to do something and have got on with it. And I think that really we have seen very little pushback, and there's less challenge to the new way of working, which perhaps we might have seen had everybody still been in the office and we're trying to introduce change as part of our normal day-to-day activities. So I think that the overall the goodwill and the support of everybody in the organisation has made this transition to the new way of working, if you like, very much more straightforward than perhaps it might otherwise have been. We're very, very pleased with the way it's going.
That's an interesting thing. I just wondered, Mike Bailey, whether I was going to say, how's it been for you from the outside? But actually, I just wonder if that's one of those interesting things about this period, in that this goodwill nation, everyone knows we're all in this kind of together. And I just think actually one of the things that, in terms of when it comes to change, one of the things that Pinnacle do obviously is they do change projects and transformations. And obviously, we all know that getting stuff changed in law firms can be slightly tricky or an uphill struggle occasionally. And I wonder if actually this is kind of one of those moments. The reason everything's got done really, really fast is because you can't really be a refusenik about this. You've kind of got to go along with whatever needs to get done. It's one of the few moments in law firm life when that's been the case, isn't it? Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, no, I can hear you. Yeah, and we've seen, it's been quite interesting. Our business, I guess when you think about impact, we feel that we've stood up quite well, in this period. And I think for us, because we're very much project based, and as you mentioned, sort of involved in a lot of change, it may be that we see the impact sort of 6 months down the line. We're sort of I guess, looking at what does the second half of our financial year looks like. We're 31st of March year end, so what does October to March look like? Because if firms are not investing in new technologies and new projects, then we would expect to see the impact on that later on from our business. But at the moment, we've seen a complete mix of how firms have responded. Have I lost you, Rupert?
No.
Okay. A complete mix of how firms have adapted. We've seen firms suspending projects. We've seen firms accelerating projects, bringing deliverables forwards, and we've seen other firms basically carrying on as normal. We do a lot of work in the risk space and in the finance system space, and we've had 2 firms go live on 3E, which is our the main product we consult on. One in April and one in May. So as you said, people maybe just adapting and pushing on, and you can't refuse to stay. I think with big projects, sometimes putting them down and picking them up again later is probably more expensive. So once you've got that head of steam, then maybe the right thing is to complete the project. But like I say, for us, it's going to be interesting to see how firms adapt coming out of lockdown, and where investment is, and what are the key areas. And for us, trying to understand, or make sure that we end up in the right place to support the firms on that journey.
I was just thinking, Kate, going back to the point about the idea of whether or not you're a process sort of person. I mean, I think everyone here is, everyone involved in this is quite process oriented, I would hope. But that's kind of your area. Do you think that that there's this is a kind of I mean, several of you have mentioned in our pre-event chats, we've talked about this notion of there's been a lot of acceleration. You said that as well, Alison, for example, in some of these things to do. Some of this, I assume, has been prioritisation. So that's been picking and choosing, like things that need to be done now because of the situation we're in. But I just wonder, okay, first of all, from a process point of view, is this a kind of special time? Because you can't be a refusenik. So much has got to get changed that everyone has to have that goodwill and going, yep, okay, well, let's get it done. If it needs to get done. Is that how you've experienced it?
Yeah, I think there's 2 levels where you're seeing the change. So at the micro level, people are working remotely, so they're on a matter team where they can't just pop down the corridor and talk to their trainee and give them work anymore. So there's been a focus on how do we run these complex multi-jurisdictional matters more effectively from our office base and the small sub team. So there's been a focus on actually, can we just quickly map this out so that it's clear to everyone in the team how we're going to work together. So it's a focus on how we're going to communicate together, who owns what, so roles and responsibilities. Whereas before that was very organic, people sitting together, and there was assumed responsibilities and a natural hierarchy to those processes, but we've had to quickly map those out and make it clear so that we can be efficient and mobilize quickly, especially with, and I think global teams are operating much better because people have a new appreciation of remote working and they respect flexible working more. So I think people had flexible working on their periphery before. It was something that maybe other people did, or we had to embrace. It was sort of forced upon us. But now people actually had to appreciate that and respect people's current situations. And I think that's shown people have responded well to that and are giving more of themselves. So I think we've seen teams benefit and mutual respect, and the law firm hierarchy perhaps is disintegrating a little bit, and people respect juniors for their views and are embracing a more global way of working.
I do love this notion of there's a flattening effect
yeah.
where people aren't able to be in the office, and it's very different. But the process is interesting to stay with, and if I can sort of flick to you, Darren, just quickly before I go to Alison, to return to that point about the acceleration. What one of the things that one of the big issues of any business in these kind of times does relate to the idea of you've got to have an eye on cost base. You've got to have an eye on where the business is making money. You've got to really sort of keep hold of that hard. but at the same time, you've got to sort of get these processes sort of pushed out to everybody, and you've got to accelerate things. What can you think of anything that you can talk about that you might be able to say, look, actually in this period we had to accelerate this project or this behaviour or this change in the business? If you could speak.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, candidly, there are some things we've had to go the other way, in which there are some things we've had to kind of put a pause on or move to snail pace, simply because I think, obviously, as we entered the crisis, there was a big focus on cash flow and performance. And frankly, we took a view we didn't want to be 6 months down the road and be looking back over our shoulder and saying, I really wish that 6 months ago we had, taken certain decisions. So we've taken a relatively cautious approach, but at the same time, that means we've had to focus energy on other areas. So, for example, we're meeting on Teams today, making sure our rollout of Teams has gathered pace. In 2 weeks, we went from talking about do we need Zoom to having Zoom and rolling it out. Been hugely successful. People really appreciated having that as part of our kind of arsenal. So things like that, where we've had to just engage very rapidly. Now, usually we would have taken a long time around something like that, so to engage, make sure we had it all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. We've had to be a lot more tactical. Now, that's not to say we've been cut corners. We've had to kind of get rapid engagement with things like information security to satisfy ourselves around that kind of project. But I think, as was being said earlier, that the resistance to change has just kind of dropped away, and the willingness to just take something and push it out very rapidly, rather than kind of a slightly more tentative, iterative approach that we would often do, has gone away. So that's just kind of one clear example, and that's very much the case with a number of other kind of collaboration tools, collaboration initiatives, which have just kind of been very kind of tactically pushed very quickly, and people have jumped on them.
How is Allison? I've been said several times I'm going to come back to you, so I'm now going to do it. What have you accelerated? Can you give us an example? I don't know if you're able to, but if you can you give us an example of what things have been pushed right up the agenda and what things have been pushed away?
I don't think there's anything that's on the broader to-do list that wasn't already there. There's been a shuffling around of what we're focusing on, and really it is that information provision on the BI space, and I think on the financial system space, just focusing on change that's really essential change, because as Kate said, there's a lot of change going on in the business, and if as was getting into that, not essential for right at this point in time, I think pausing to let other things go through and focus on what's most needed has been there. But from the information space, it's really making sure, as I said, that senior management have got the views of the information that they need. We're not looking at anything new. It's generally the timescale that we've been looking at it that's been the change. So rather than looking at something once a month or being able to self-serve, we're doing sort of a push out on a weekly basis, and it's just that different timeline to those trends, so we can see if the period of things are changing or not. And that, as I say, that thinking about how we presented information differently to help drive better insights was something that was quite high on my agenda for this year. So it has been really good from my perspective to be able to accelerate that and get the traction with it and be able to build on that going forward. It's not taken technical resources away from other priorities in order to do that, because we had the tools and we had the skills to do it.
Thank you. I'm going to get to Kate, who's got a hand up over there. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the client side. So obviously, been talking to lots of clients who are now under changing pressures, and price has been a big focus in the last couple of months of our pricing strategy and how we can respond to clients' needs in this time. And that goes back to, okay, how do you respond to that? So we need to look at our delivery model, and to successfully design an efficient and profitable delivery model, you have to go back to process. So we need to look at every element of that delivery model and make sure it's tweaked so that it's completely optimal for us and for the client, so that we make some money and they get the best price possible. So I think the focus on process is going to be even more over the next 6-12 months of how do we make this mutually beneficial. Otherwise, those clients will start going to the ASLPs, you know, the big fours who have the economies of scale and can offer the cheaper prices and who offer a broader range of technology as well. And we've seen an uptick, which is good, of the adoption of things like DocuSign, so electronic signing, and other technologies for remote working in specific legal practices, so that the delivery model is as efficient as it can be, which is, we've been working on this with lawyers for a long time, and they've not been embracing that, but we've seen a few areas where they've taken it up very quickly.
Which is the area that's been the best?
Actually, well, ironically, and you will see an increase in litigation. So it's been dispute resolution who have been, you know, on pause. No one's been taking up disputes, but they will come. So they've been gearing up for, you know, how do we resolve disputes remotely? The courts have been closed, so embracing things like ScribeStar, TrialPad, new technologies to make their lives more efficient and to work in, you know, with lots of documents and lots of different parties more efficiently.
So I've got a hand up from Mike Bailey, but hold on a second. I just want to get to Mike Giles because I haven't gone round the room to him. Get to him. Mike Giles, you're kind of you've always had a stick to wave for data-led decision making, and I just want how, you know, like what has been accelerated or what's become really incredibly more useful, do you think, around the data-led decision making for the business in this time?
I think the biggest change has been the acceleration, if you like, in the acceptance and adoption of stuff that we'd already been working on. So we've moved rather more away from as Alison, more away from the month-end reporting where we sit down and we go through the numbers, to far more focus on daily updates based on BI coming out and updating on a daily basis through dashboards, what have you. Seen far greater adoption of that, a greater emphasis on the very short term. So we're looking at not just, you know, what our monthly utilization might be, but we're now looking at the value of work done on a daily basis. We're looking at cash collections on a daily basis. And it's a far more hands-on approach now than perhaps we have seen in the past. It was the kind of direction of travel we were aiming for anyway. But we've seen a far greater acceleration in the adoption and the acceptance of that approach to business management than perhaps we had previously. I don't think really we've seen, you know, there are certain things that had to change. It was around workflow, the way we did things. You know, an obvious one, sounds a bit crazy, but an obvious one was who's going to sign the checks now. And so, you know, that was a day one problem. Of course, we couldn't issue any checks, so we stopped issuing checks and we found alternative solutions. Similarly around workflows generally, whereas people were used to sort of signing bits of paper and shoving them in orange envelopes and moving around the building, that all had to stop. And so again, going back to the previous comment about, you know, the acceleration of adoption of new technology and the willingness to adopt and to change has been quite remarkable and very, very welcome.
Mike Bailey, you know, I didn't know whether you had your hand up on that one, but I just wondered if you didn't, whether or not you've got a perspective on. Because obviously you said you've been implementing some PMS systems stuff. From your perspective, what's been, you know, the kind of you know, the change in terms of, you know, the data related changes and upticks and or rather in improvements? How has data played a part in getting people to get sort of businesses to adapt, especially in these kind of very pressured times around finances?
I guess our business is broken up into a number of practice groups. We talked about being, you know, finance systems and risk. One of the practice groups is within the finance systems, I guess, is a whole BI team, and we're seeing, you know, increasing demand for that kind of skill. You know, part of TR's strategy is to use the Microsoft stack for BI, and we've been growing that team. We're getting requests for different types of content, so one of the initiatives I'm involved with our lead is around delivering GL information, and how do you visualize something that I think Alison mentioned about visualizing data. How do you visualize something that's generally a 3-column P&L, your current, your budget, and your variance, and with current month, that and life to date or year to date. So we're kind of seeing a lot of demand for those kind of services, and people starting to think about different types of content to deliver. We're looking with TR at how we bring in content from different systems as well, because a BI solution that's based just on the practice management system or the finance system is only giving you, it's looking through one lens. We see demand for data from other sources as well. So for us, it's probably one of our bigger growth areas, and something that we see demand way into the future, probably more so than some of our other practice groups.
How are you? One of the questions I was going to say is just to flick back around again. So Mike, one of the things I wanted to get in just to cover in this was to talk about, obviously we've got everyone's going to be hopefully into this. We've got businesses that are very distributed now, and even though they may well be less distributed than now in the future, for now they will still be quite distributed, working from home and remote, to put it that way. And how is it? What kind of, can you think of a couple of sort of not tips and tricks, but kind of a couple of core pieces of advice for how you think you've succeeded in terms of getting the communication out, the information out about what has been sort of what people have needed to know, certainly around like the business position, or sort of what they need to understand about how they contribute to it at this time when they've also got to do everything now. They've got to be on endless amounts of online calls, and you've got to do reporting much faster. It just sounds like an awful lot of bandwidth to take to get this information out into the business. I wonder if I could get you to start that one on how you've dealt with that. Sorry, Mike Giles. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Right.
Sorry,
Two
Mike.
mics on the call. Yeah, we have been, I guess, gearing up just simply to get the information out more quickly. The systems that we've been developing over the last few years enable us to do that. I think that we need to, one of my roles, I think, is to demystify the finance. And if we can put things in graphical format, the pictures will always get the message across much more easily than the sort of the 3-column, 5-column P&L, and it's trying to identify those areas which specifically need attention. So what we're trying to focus on is exception reporting rather than just reporting everything. And I've talked in the past about producing information rather than data. We produce an awful lot of data. Sometimes the information that it gets lost in the middle of that. And so trying to sort that out and highlight those areas that really need attention are I think key. And so we're kind of, I guess we're evolving our reporting to a point where we don't just completely flood everybody's desktop with data. We want them to actually look at things that are actionable and are capable of being dealt with today, that are going to make a difference. It's relatively early days, I guess. I think it's definitely a trend that is going to continue, and I think that particularly with people working remotely, we don't have the luxury anymore of being able to sort of turn around and just chat to somebody the way that we used to. Everything's a bit more formalized now, and there's a lot of pre-planned conference calls rather than those ad hoc sort of serendipitous type meetings. And so we just have to be a bit more structured, a bit more disciplined in the way that we're trying to get information across, and recognizing, of course, that when you're trying to communicate remotely, it is very much two-way communication, and what you deliver may not necessarily be what's actually seen, and therefore we have to understand the users of the information very much more clearly, so that there can be no ambiguity over what we're saying. And so I think clear, concise messages and try and get rid of the clutter is where we're going.
That's an interesting point to make about in terms of focusing for people like me. That would be focus on the story. What is the data telling you? Not just handing over tons of data. It's be able to parse it. Alison, is that your experience too? In terms of, has the business tried to focus more on telling you just the stuff you need to know?
Look, I think so. I was nodding either virtually or physically as Mike was talking, because I absolutely agree. Very much of help people get one step ahead of that, presenting it in such a way that you don't actually have to figure out what it's trying to say. You can then, understand what it's saying and decide whether you need to take any action on it, or whether that's when you can go, okay, I've got the story, I can park it, I think that's fine. Getting people that advantage of making best use of people's time, whether it's the transaction teams and what's happening on their matters and supporting the legal ops teams and what they're doing in that space, or whether it's out to the executive on a daily basis, or working with your colleagues that are trying to do something different for their particular practice group that they may be working with. Anything we can do to get people a step ahead is a good investment of our time, because it's saving somebody else and helping with those data-driven decisions that Mike was referencing earlier.
This, also relates heavily to what kind of how you get that information out to people and what it is, kind of also relates to kind of the work they do. So I'm just going to flick across to the other side of the panel now and go, how is this, Darren, how has this been at your place in terms of trying to sort of, what kind of challenges have there been about pushing information out? It sounds like people have had to slim down the kind of the stuff that people are telling them and just say stuff more frequently. And I also wonder whether or not that is, like, from what it sounds from sort of Mike and Alison, that is this sticky? Is this notion of we have to cut through the noise, get this information to people more frequently? Have you had experience that? How has it been? And is it going to stick?
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with much of what Mike was saying. We've been on a journey kind of pre-COVID around making the data more meaningful, and so I think finance departments in the past have been guilty of the sin of just assuming that reports showing endless reams of data, people can interpret it and do something with it, and of course people just get it and file it and do nothing with it. So I think one thing we've already been on a journey of is making it more intuitive, so it tells you what you need to know. And using graphics as a part of that has absolutely been a part of it, making it more real time rather than providing a report 2 weeks after month end that is no longer relevant for people because time's moved on. So we've already been on that journey. I think what this has done is it's kind of brought that into stark relief as to why this is so important. And actually, for us, a big part of the journey has also been, frankly, getting people to conform to the business disciplines of closing timesheets and all those kind of good things, which then makes our data more meaningful. And actually, what this has brought home is people get it because it's really helping them see the benefit of why those things are important. Because then we can show them, within 24 hours, this is what's going on. These are trends we're seeing. Here's the good news. Here's the bad news. Here's what you need to know right now. Which has been really useful, and I do think it will stick. People are seeing the benefit from it, seeing the clarity in the message, and it's not just a message to partners. One of the things that we've very much felt is important throughout the crisis has been to be quite transparent with our people, not least because we're asking our people to take part of the pain in some areas, and therefore we think there's always a kind of a duty on us to kind of say to them, like, here's why we're talking about these things. So here's what's going on in the business. You need to be responsible as well as to being part of the solution. So I think some of these things have been really kind of important for bringing the business on that journey together. And I do absolutely think that some of the things we've been doing, yes, maybe we've had to slim down some reporting in certain areas to get it out quicker, but I absolutely think it will stick as people realise it's been kind of giving them what they need to know that is actionable today.
Changing processes and keeping them sort of like sticky sounds like the perfect segue for you, Kate, to talk about the idea of how this is, what this is about in terms of, one of my key points here is in terms of like using data to identify processes that need to be changed or improved, and then making them stick based on where we've been. Sounds something that'd be right up your street. Have you got an example that you can think of in terms of like what wasn't sticky before or wasn't be done that now can be stuck down because people have got why it's important?
Yeah, before this, there was an increasing demand for data and management information from not only internally, but clients as well. So on matters and transactions, they wanted data, but there was always a disconnect between the data and the strategy. So as we've said, what does that data mean? What information is it giving you? What do you want to do with it? So that's come to the forefront now. So we can produce you plenty of data, but what does that mean, and how do we then change our approach to make things better? So interpreting the data, there's a gap there. So we can now produce the data and tell you, how many minutes or hours something's taken, but what do you then want to do with that? How does that feed your business strategy or the client's strategy for undertaking that transaction? So I think that there's a danger that we're getting lost in the numbers and the data. And it eats up time as well, and you need to upskill people in interpreting the data and being able to advise clients or partners internally of what they then need to do with that information and linking it back to the process. So it's a continual loop of continuous improvement. So that data will have some meaning that needs to have an impact on that process. You need to change an element of the process because it's not happening quick enough, or it's taking too long, or it needs to have a link. And I think that they're not making that link at the moment. And I've got a good example actually of we've been helping many of the banks on the coronavirus business interruption loan schemes. So we've been running some of those. And of course the banks want data in real time about where are we with processing those loans, and then the government need the information to release the funds. So we've been at the coalface again of very quick transactions and needing data to produce data, and the law firms just aren't used to releasing real-time data. They shy away from it, but we've had to in these schemes where money wasn't released unless they had the data. So my team have been designing dashboards and interpreting that data so that just decisions can be made. And I think that's been an eye-opener for me of what you can do quickly as well with data, and think of it as a continuous improvement piece of information to quickly improve the way that you're operating.
So I'm just going to make sure that we stick to our program time so that people can get back to their more important things. I'm going to I think we need to get to a last one. I'm going to start with Mike Bailey for this, and it's a slightly larger end question really, which is something that got brought up in our in one of our pre-chats actually. That Mike Bailey, do you think law firms, and I'm going to ask everyone else this question as well, so you're going to get ready for it. Which is, do you think that law firms, in a way, it is potentially very lucky that law firms are facing this now, rather than, say, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, because of the way that many firms have done a reasonable amount of transformative or agile, work development over the last couple of years. I would say even perhaps 3 years ago, that it is, if this had happened not long ago, that legal may not have been anywhere near as ready, or is that unfair?
I think it's an interesting question. From our perspective, we only see a sort of a subset of the technology platform that firms are working with. I think Mike Giles made the comment yesterday that if this had happened in the last recession, then there would have been probably more businesses failing as a result of not having the technology platforms in place. So I think things are just generally more available. We've talked about how quickly people have moved on to Teams and working remotely. It's the infrastructure is generally there. I wonder whether that's partly because our panels are made up of international firms and they've had to work out some of those problems to make themselves efficient with international offices. Be interesting to see if that translates to single office domestic practices, and we've not really got that representation. I think from my perspective, one of the things I think would be interesting to understand, and I know most of the firms, and I think everybody's on what we'd call a modern finance platform, finance system platform. And, there's different, we've talked about the challenges, process challenges, the BI challenges. I'm kind of curious to know from the panel if there are any processes that are suboptimal. Mike talks about moving to just simple things like electronic check printing and signing paper and elimination of paper. Is there anything in the finance system space that firms need that is still, it's not provided by the vendors? Basically gaps in the offering, and maybe processes that people are still working on that are overly manual. And for us, does that create something we should be looking at to try and help firms to address those gaps?
Okay, let's do the gap one first. I think we should start with you, Alison. Really, bear in mind that this is specifically a question related to that.
Look, I think again, thinking about what we need to do to best respond to the business need at the moment. There's processes that are working that I suspect we could support better if we looked at some of the functionality we're not necessarily taking advantage of now. So working with those folks that are on the coal faces of those processes to get them familiar with what could come next and whether that is of benefit and whether that should be, get elevated up the roadmap or not. Well, I probably talked about that 3 times already today on other calls and how we plan and engage with the business. But to my mind, it is listening to what it always should be, listening to what we're being asked to support and then working out our best way to support it and then juggling the different priorities. And I think picking up on some of the things that Kate was saying and how as a group of business services functions, we're talking with each other to make sure we've got a clear understanding of what the challenges everyone's facing. And so from my perspective, what do we need to do and where do we need to position ourselves to help support? So, are the legal ops teams and the LPM teams producing more information out to clients? Have they got the data that they need to do it? Is there any blockers to them getting that information out to either the transaction teams or the client teams to help with that? And what can we open up from our side? But yeah, absolutely. I think some things will get accelerated because processes are working, but they could work better if we supported them with technology a bit better. But again, if the business priority pushes us somewhere else, we'll just respond to that one as well.
Mike, Giles, have you got an example you can give us about sort of gap? What gap do you see? Or maybe what gap do you think that most firms, it'd be very interesting to go what you think, is there a process you think that if you thought of other firms as well, it's always been a gap and it was exposed by this?
I guess that I would say that whatever system you look at, somewhere along the line, there will be some paper that somebody's going to be scribbling on or doing something with. It's always been the case. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your finance systems or other systems, somebody's going to be scribbling on a piece of paper at some point in the process. I think over the years we've been gradually eliminating those and improving the workflows so that we become more efficient. And I think that firms have been investing in technology and IT equipment for many years. And we are getting better and the technology is getting better every year. And so I think that bit by bit we are improving. This has brought to a head, I think, very quickly some of the inefficiencies that exist within organizations generally. And as I said earlier, the check signing was a classic example of something that's been around for years and years and years. We've been trying to eliminate it, but somebody always feels comfortable sending out a check in the mail. And we've had to deal with that. And no doubt that, now that problem is solved, there'll be something else along the line that we'll find that is now, that pinch point that's causing the systems to slow. So I don't think, apart from some of the obvious things like that, I don't think there's any real answers that you could say, if only law firms did this, everything would be fine, because if it were that simple, we'd have all done it already anyway. But I do think there has in the past been perhaps a resistance to change, and we've certainly seen an acceleration in the adoption of change over the last few months, and I think that will continue. People getting used to working a different way, and because they're working a different way, they approach the working a different way.
It's true. I've got a that's a good one, and I hope you're glad that I kind of got to your point about if it happened before. I think this would have been a very different. I'm going to get to UK because I know you got your hand up. But Mike, Giles, you mentioned this before. Do you think it's the case that even if it happened 5 years ago, that this would be a very different story that we'd be doing?
From my point of view, personally, I think it would have been a different story. I think that there has been acceleration in the approach to technology and process improvement over the last 5 years in particular. 5 years ago, we were, the industry generally was pretty slow to adopt change, I think. And it would have been very difficult, issues such as broadband, everybody having laptops, Citrix, connectivity would all have been issues. And I think that investment that's been made over the last few years is now really starting to pay dividends.
I'm going to move to Kate. You've got something you want to chip in on that one?
Yeah, I think for me, the gap area is pricing and cost management technology and tools. And I think that needs to be accelerated now that we're being asked by clients to change our approach and be agile on price and cost. And there just isn't a holistic solution in the market for those types of technology, so that we need to use historic data to make better pricing decisions and estimates. There are things out there that allow you to do it, but they're laborious, time consuming, and they don't link to the matter life cycle. So they don't link into scenario planning, strategy, modeling options. So there's a gap there for me of being able to be agile in the way that we price and then manage the cost all the way through.
Awesome, thank you, Darren. I think you kind of get one of the last words here for this. I think, do you think that, first of all, do you think what do you think, if you can identify a gap, do so, and then also give me an idea of, do you think law is fortunate, and that's a terrible word to use for this, and I can't think of another word to use really, or rather a lucky escape that it happened now rather than a couple of years ago?
Well, I mean, you could argue it's been a lucky escape, and I think that a few years ago there have been a number of firms in a lot of difficulty. I mean, frankly, I know of some firms that have had difficulties. I mean, it hasn't quite come out publicly. They've covered it over quite well, but there are a few firms that have clearly not invested in their technical infrastructure in the background that have had real problems. And have had to kind of very rapidly come up with solutions to make it work. Now, the fact is, they were able to come up with rapid solutions quite quickly to make it work. But in some respects, this has been a time where I've been able to turn around and say to people, those big bet investments we made in our technical infrastructure a few years ago, here's why. So it really has kind of put those firms that have made those investments in a really good stead. Now, can we do better? Absolutely. And I think in terms of the gaps, for me, it's exposed just how much we tinker around to try and do our customized processes all over the place, or there's things which weren't really big pain points, so we've never bothered to deal with it. So the paper flows around our buildings of manual signatures rather than putting in DocuSigns or electronic processes which are able to cover these things over. We've rapidly had to come up with alternatives. We've been able to do that. Will we go back? Of course we won't. We'll kind of take these learnings forward, and there's more that we can do. And I think we're also then thinking about, well, how can we get organizational efficiencies and benefits from that? The more we standardize our processes, the more we're able to think about process automation and driving further efficiency. So I think there's a continuum, there's a journey that we're on. And I think most firms have grappled with some of those major areas. We've got one or two I can think of where we're still kind of wanting to shine the spotlight and make changes, not so much in the finance space, but outside of finance. And I think it's bringing into stark relief that a core part of enabling an efficient and resilient business model in the modern world is to embrace concepts like the cloud, is to embrace digitization as a positive thing, rather than kind of clinging to outdated things that have kind of worked, but they've never been broken enough to really bring it into stark relief to change. And I think that's certainly one positive which is coming from the crisis.
Incredible acceleration has occurred. I think I'm going to draw this programme to a close there. Mike Bailey, I do want to give you sort of a chance to say what do you think is the acceleration here? What do your sort of do? I think we didn't. do you think that actually law firms over the last couple of years, I mean, obviously we've covered, briefing has covered, and we've had events and what have you around the forms of transformation. You know, we have a whole event area called transformation, efficiency and innovation. And we've watched this over, I've certainly been very keen on watching this over the last 5 years, and watching firms go from, I would felt, to be honest with you, a relatively simplistic, by and large, there were lots of exceptions, approach about 5 years ago to certain kinds of, you say, technical infrastructures and approaches to remote working and the ability to be anywhere and try and push your systems out to anyone else. There's been a big ramp up, and I think that the pudding's been proved, as Darren would probably say. You know, there's been a lot of, you know, I would say business cases for certain things are going to be a heck of a lot easier after this than they might have been before. What do you think to that, Mike Bailey?
The impression I get is that, you know, as I said, the firms on the panel have the technology, the infrastructure, the platforms in place to be able to deliver improvement and go on that journey of sort of incremental change. I think there probably are still firms, and you know, we're still, you know, our practice management, finance systems business is sort of very busy. There are a number of firms still trying to move away from older technologies, you know, and we see that being something that's going to keep us busy for the next sort of 4 or 5 years, you know. So, and it's not that these systems don't work; they're just a little bit less automated, and they're not really platforms for change. You know, I think with the right foundations, I think firms have been able to adapt and to adapt to the conditions. It'll just be, you know, hopefully everybody's going to come out of this well, but yeah, it'll be interesting where if there are failures, then how much of that could have been averted by just being on more up-to-date technology. How much will be technology based, and how much is it, you know, just more challenging business issues, you know, around type of maybe type of law somebody practices, for example, you know, and things that you just couldn't avoid.
So thank you. I think that's a good wrap up, actually. I don't even need to do it. I can leave now. What I would say is we never get to everything. I'm sorry if we didn't get something that was one of your own personal bets noir about this, but I thank my participants enormously for helping us out on launching our Tiger Team project. We'll be having a monthly event, recording or webcast for Tiger Team from now until September, and hopefully bring it forward after that. By bringing a variety of people together to talk about a particular subject rather than having just one group of one type of person to do. I think one of the things that I'm most fascinated by, especially from the finance perspective, is something that's come out of this discussion, also from the research that we did to understand what the challenges are, is that to finance people, cash might be king, but the discovery in the last few months is that process is queen, and you do what she tells you when it comes down to that. And I think that's something for me, the takeaway here, that these, I think it's bound them so inextricably together. I think actually in law firms, it's one of the most really interesting visions that we've been seeing in reporting for the last few months. So I'd like to say thank you to Kate Bassett at Ashurst, Mike Giles at Fieldfisher, Darren Mitchell at Hogan Lovells, Allison Scanlan at Herbert Smith Freehills, and Mike Bailey at Pinnacle for being our Tigers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rupert.
Thanks a lot.